Hey, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name's Christina Kent, and I'm a full-time fine artist based in San Francisco. And today I wanted to share with you a sort of embarrassing, uncomfortable story. So since deciding to do art full-time at the beginning of this year, I decided, well, if I want to do art full-time, if I want to start working with galleries and meeting other artists, then I really need to get out there. I need to start going to openings and going to in-person events and trying to meet people, trying to get a sense of the art scene here in San Francisco. Now, luckily, I live in a big city, so there are tons of art openings that are happening all the time. And so I thought, okay, well, let me find a gallery that looks cool, let me go to an opening that seems interesting, and I'll go and, I'll talk to people, I'll meet people, I'll have a great time. So I quickly found an interesting art opening to go to. I walked over to the gallery and I thought, okay, let's check it out. But as soon as I walked into the gallery space and I saw all the people walking around and talking to each other, and I felt the hum of activity, and I saw just how fancy everything looked too in this gallery space, I immediately felt completely out of place. I felt this huge wave of anxiety, like, wait, what do I do? I scanned the room and I noticed that I did not know a single person there. And on top of that, it looked like everyone in the room was already in groups, like kind of tight-knit friend groups, having great conversations, and it just seemed like impossible to meet anybody. They all seemed like they felt perfectly comfortable in the space, and I felt completely out of place. So I was like, what do I do? In my panic, I immediately turned to the artwork and just started pensively looking at all of the pieces in the show, standing in front of each piece, looking at it for a while, examining all the details, trying to act like I wasn't feeling completely awkward. I kept thinking to myself, you should talk to someone, find a way to start a conversation. Most of these people are probably really nice. Why don't you just go up to someone and say something, introduce yourself? And yet every time the idea popped into my head, I was just filled with this wave of panic. So rather than talk to anyone, I just looked at all the art around the room, and once I'd seen all the pieces, I immediately walked out. So why do I tell you this story? Well, maybe you've had a similar experience yourself, or you're interested in going to art openings, but you're not really sure how to approach them. And since this experience, I've learned a few things that have helped me when I go to openings to actually start talking to people and meeting new people. But first, I'll also bring up a few other faux pas that I've done, and maybe you can relate. And just as a quick note, this video isn't sponsored by anyone, but if you want to support my work, you can purchase my paintings on my website, you can join my Patreon, or you can like, comment, or subscribe to this channel. All of these things really help. So in addition to going to an art opening and not talking to a single person, I've also gone to an opening and seen someone that I thought I knew. I thought they were some acquaintance that I hadn't seen in a while. So I enthusiastically went up to them and was chatting with them for what feels like ages until I finally realized it was not that person. And I basically just left the conversation and escaped as quickly as I could. I've also gone to parties with my significant other or with a friend, and I have clung to them the whole time out of fear of breaking off and mingling with other people. I've also managed to meet a kind stranger at a party, had a great conversation with them, and then tried to cling to them the whole night because I was afraid to talk to anybody else. And through all these experiences, I've gotten the impression that, yeah, I'm just not good at mingling. I'm not a party person. I'm great. I love being by myself, working in the studio. I love talking to artists one-on-one and hearing about their practices. But when it comes to approaching a large group of people, especially people that I don't know, but even in a large group of people that I do know, it can be hard to manage. Like, how do you mingle? How do you talk to people? What's the right sort of social etiquette in these situations? But despite my anxiety around mingling, I still want to go to these openings and to meet new people. It's both a good move on the business side of things, like as a full-time artist, it's great to network and know people in your industry, but also I think it's fun. It's great to connect with other artists and people who love art. And it's a world that I want to be a part of. Because I don't know about you, but growing up, I never went to art openings. I didn't even really go to museums that much. And so to me, the art world seems like pretty obscure and difficult to get into. And I kind of just thought, there are people who are good at this, and there are people who aren't, and I'm just one of those people that aren't good at it. But recently, my perspective on this has started to change. I saw other artists on social media talking about how they approach art openings and networking. And also I read two books that have come up on this topic. One is called The Art of Mingling, and the other one is called How to Work a Room. And I will say, like, with these books, I noticed that there are a lot of things that I'm not a huge fan of. Some of the tactics seem like really gimmicky, but there are a lot of nuggets of things that I found really helpful. So what have I learned from these books? The main takeaway for me was not even this specific tips that the books have, but just this whole idea that mingling is a skill that can be learned. That was totally new to me. Like I said, I thought it was something that you were either good at or bad at. It was like a talent that you had or you didn't. But these books helped convince me that no, actually a lot of people are not naturally good at going into a room and meeting total strangers. Like, this is often a skill that most people have to learn. So as soon as I thought of mingling as a skill rather than an innate talent, then I immediately thought, okay, well, if I want to learn a skill, what do I do? What's my training plan? And whenever I'm trying to learn something new, I try to learn it in baby steps. So for me, here are my steps. Step one was to go to an art opening and not talk to anyone. Just go to the opening. Just be there in the space to get a sense of what it's like and what people do and kind of what the vibe is. Okay, so I'd already gone to an opening and not talked to anyone, so I checked that one off. What about step two? So the next step that I thought of was to go to the opening and talk to the artist. Why did I choose this as my second step? I think that going to an opening and talking to the artist is easier than trying to strike up a conversation with a random guest, at least for me, because I knew that the artist kind of like, you know, if they're doing an art opening for their show, it's kind of their job to say hi and greet all of the people who are coming to the opening. And in my own experience, having my solo show earlier this year, I was so happy that so many people were coming to the show, and I was excited to meet all of these complete strangers who were coming. I would say even at these openings, it's kind of expected that you talk to the artist. So they're very receptive for people coming up to them, introducing themselves, and saying something nice about their work. So for the next opening that I wanted to go to, I researched the artist. I found them on Instagram so I knew what they looked like. And then when I went to the opening, I saw them talking with a few people, and I kind of waited for a moment when it seemed like the crowd died down a bit and there seemed to be an opening. And I walked up to them and I just introduced myself and told them that I really liked the work. And because there weren't a bunch of other people around, I also asked them a few questions about their process, and we had a lovely conversation. The artist was more than happy to talk to me about the work, and I talked to them for just a few minutes. I think it's important here, like, don't monopolize the artist's time, because if it's their opening, they're probably going to be talking to a lot of people. But I think asking a question or two is totally fine. And then I just said, well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. It was great to meet you. I'm going to all look at the rest of the work. And it may not sound like a big deal, but going through that step was actually like a big process for me because I'd never done that before. But as soon as I'd done it, I was like, okay, this isn't so bad. So that was step two for me, going to an opening and talking to the artist. I still didn't talk to anyone else at the show, but I talked to the artist, so I counted that as progress. Okay, so what about step three? Step three is to go to the opening, talk to an artist, and then strike up a conversation with one guest that you don't know. So how did this play out for me? So similar to the first two times, I went to the opening, I looked at some of the work, I saw the artist and chatted with them when there was kind of a break in conversation, and then I was like, okay, let me try to talk to someone that I don't already know. So I was kind of walking around the room and looking at some of the art pieces, trying to figure out, like I was kind of like looking around, but it seemed like most people were in conversation with groups, and I didn't really know how to break into that. So I'm just kind of like looking around at the artwork, and as I'm looking at one of the pieces, another person walks up and starts looking at that same piece. And I thought, okay, here's my moment. I'll say something about the piece, and then we'll strike up a conversation. But I was still feeling incredibly nervous, so all I could think to say about the piece was, it's so beautiful. And as soon as I said it, I thought, oh my gosh, like that, it's so dumb. It's like such a simple comment. Like, can't I think of something more nuanced to say? This is what my inner critic was telling me. But the gentleman who'd walked up to the painting was so nice, and he immediately kind of took the bait on my conversation and started making his own comments about the work. Once he'd made his comment about the piece and I realized that he was up to talking and meeting someone new, then I asked him a question that I think is a great opening if you're meeting someone new at an art opening, and that's to ask, oh, how did you hear about the artist? I found out that he'd known the artist for many years and that they were good friends, and then we had a great conversation about his life in the Bay Area. And even though I felt like my opening by just saying that the art piece was beautiful wasn't like the most profound thing to say, I think the important part was that I was approaching the interaction with a feeling of openness and friendliness. And I think I think he picked up on that, and that's why we were able to have a conversation. And that brings me to another helpful tip when it comes to going to art openings and meeting people. I think it's really helpful to try to take the pressure off. When I go to these openings, I'm not thinking, oh, I need to network, I need to meet people, because that just seems, there's a lot of pressure on that, and it feels really transactional. So instead, what I try to tell myself is, hey, I just want to meet someone and have a great conversation. That's a much lighter, easier goal to have, and I feel like it just makes it a lot more fun. It also sort of takes the focus off of me, I think, because if I'm thinking, well, I want to network, I'm thinking about what I can get out of the situation. Versus if I'm thinking, hey, I want to have a fun conversation, I'm thinking, how can I make the event more fun for everybody else? How can I help this other person I'm talking with also have a good time? And that's just a lot more motivating for me. Some other tips that I found helpful from these books were talking about like the optimal mingling time. So when you're interacting with someone new at one of these events, then they recommend spending like talking to them for maybe like 5 to 10 minutes. You don't want to like lock someone in conversation for the whole evening because a lot of people at these events, they want to mingle, they want to talk to other people. At the same time, you don't want to talk to them for too short amount of time because that could come off as rude. They were saying 5 to 10 minutes is the sweet spot, and I feel like, yeah, a few minutes of conversation, that feels right to me. And when you do start talking with someone, it's always helpful to think about your exit strategy. So if you do want to go on and mingle with other people, then I like to think of something that I'm going to say once the conversation has kind of reached a natural ending point or slowed down a bit. And it can be anything from like my go-to, given that it's an art gallery opening, is usually, well, it was so great to meet you, I'm gonna look at the rest of the show. And I feel like that's a great way to share goodwill with this person, but also move on so that you can go and mingle with other people. And another great tip is to go with someone that you already know. But the caveat to this is don't hang out with them the same night. Instead, both of you make efforts to mingle with other people, and then you can meet up during the night and kind of share your experiences. Or if you meet someone, you can actually introduce them to your friend. And so then you're kind of helping everyone get to know each other. All that being said, I'm still figuring out how to mingle at these events, how to meet people. And it's just a continual process for me. So I wanted to kind of share where I'm at right now so that if you're at a similar stage, this might be helpful to you, but I am still learning and I'm still figuring it out. So some of the things I'm still working on are just feeling comfortable in these situations. I still feel really, really nervous when I go to these events. And so I'm trying to just, overcome my fears through going to a bunch of them so that I just get used to it. That's kind of my plan there, but it's something that I'm working on. Another thing that I'm working on is talking to the gallerist. Oftentimes I feel like when it comes to the gallerist, because I'm looking for gallery representation, it feels like there's a lot of sort of pressure in that interaction, because in the back of my head I'm thinking, oh, I would love representation, I want to ask them for a studio visit, but you don't really want to do that out of the blue. Most gallerists don't like it when artists do that, in my experience. So at these openings, I kind of tend to not talk to the gallerist, but I think it's important to talk to them and to meet them and to introduce yourself. Like, you don't have to say, oh, here's my work, or give them a business card, but I think it's still good to like talk to them. So that's something that I want to start working on. Another thing I'm working on is how to talk to larger groups of people. So at previous openings, I've managed to chat with people who I find like kind of off on their own, but when there's a group of people in conversation, I find them much harder to approach. And recently I went to an opening and I didn't know a single person, and they were all talking in larger groups. So I kind of just really didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to enter those conversations. So anyway, these are things I'm working on. I just think it's a constant learning process, and hopefully in the future I'll have more to share on my progress here. So that's all I have for today. I hope you liked this video and found it helpful. If you have questions on mingling or want to share your own experience about it, please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting this channel and making these videos happen. If you like my work, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.